Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, students. Afternoon, Vice-Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor Designate and everyone that's on this platform. Welcome to this conversation on how, and it's the big question, how do we address the scourge of gender-based harm more effectively, particularly within our university? This is a conversation that is really set up for us to come up with some suggestions, practical solutions, ideas for the university to consider, and for us to jointly think about, work through, and see how we take it forward.
Jerome, thank you very much. Colleagues, thank you for agreeing to be part of this meeting. Zeblon and I have been talking and have been fairly concerned about the state of gender-based harm more broadly in the country, and obviously at Wits itself. In particular, we were traumatized by the latest death of Ms. Zozo, who was a student at Wits and who died a couple of months ago at the alleged hands of her boyfriend. And the circumstances around that shook us quite substantively. It had only been a year after the death of Uyinene at UCT. And the big question we began asking is, what can we do? What more can we do in our capacity as Vice-Chancellor exiting and Vice-Chancellor incoming? You do know that we have a gender-based harm office. You do know that they've got an explicit mandate and are advised by the Sexual Harassment Committee. You do know that we've got a new disciplinary process. You are aware that we have new regulations around relationships between staff and students. All of that, but whether we like it or not, the death of Ms. Zozo indicates that it's just not enough. We need to do more.
Thank you, Adam. Good afternoon, and thank you, Jerome, team, and everybody who's here for making your time to be with us this afternoon to put our heads together and see how we can at least try to find practical solutions. What can we do to change the culture? I mean, you can take reactive actions. These things are a crime is crime. The whole aim of management of a situation like this is preventive process. We think someone, once they've done the deed, doesn't help. So we need to ensure that we change somewhat the institutional DNA of the university. I see that Mr. Michael Dick is here. Like, what kind of war chance do we have? It's a broad transformation project. It will not be done overnight. How do you change the macho culture adversities? I mean, I listened to some of I happen to understand Zulu very well. It's my mother tongue. And some of the war chants, which are nice, young boys having fun at men's rest. But I mean, I found that they don't belong to the 20th century university or 21st century university, right? I mean, the kind of language is quite obscene, And, where do you draw the line, Michael, between lads having fun and a bunch of guys? Because these things obviously have a source. And then there's a vector that spreads it out. Because when behaviors in group chants happen that way, then how do you, I think I want to take it even beyond just taking concrete actions, is a real institutional culture change, which is a part of our broader national transformative project. We can't solve the national problems, the incompetence of the state, but what can we do within the perimeters of the university? Thank you, Vice Chancellor.
Okay, I'm ready to hear people's thoughts. Anybody?
Yeah. So colleagues, students, please feel free. There's already a comment in the box from Kamini Pillay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is such an important conversation to have. As an institution, we need to have more such conversations. Are there networks or platforms where we can also have such conversations with key role players from all institutions of higher learning? We need a think bigger, and beyond just Wits to tackle this plague, the GBV plague. We need collective action and a united stand. So there's a question, and then Charlene, I see your hand. If you can come in, please.
Just in answer to Carmony's comment, actually, the GEO has just started reaching out to other offices like ours on other campuses to create a community of practice for this reason, so that we are at least in the offices speaking with each other to strengthen our processes, to assist each other on how to do things better, how can we work collaboratively, so that, you know, if we're running a process here at Wits, we can pick up the phone and call UJ colleagues if needs be. So I mean, just to say, I agree with Carmony that it does need to be beyond just Wits, and GEO is looking at that.
Okay, thank you for that, Charlene.
Jerome?
Come in, Prof. Come in, Prof.
I was just going to say, Charlene, I mean, I think it's a lovely idea. I was just going to say, USAF has meant to have, if you like, a secretariat that is meant to facilitate and enable those communities of practice. So if you separately ask Tasneem to put you in touch with Ahmed Bawa, he can get the secretariat to support you in setting up the meetings and doing all of the kinds of conversations that are meant there, because that's their job, to enable communities of practice system-wide.
Thanks, Adam. I've made a note of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Vice-Chancellor, for the opportunity. From the residency side, we have been discussing as management as to what do we do, because it has now become kind of a crisis. We believe that our residencies are basically the microcosm of a society, and just as Wits University is. So we were also looking at the practical, very practical solutions to the issue. We have already had some engagement with the ARSC during their handover that we really need to work on the culture change in residences. Like what Prof. Zeblon has said in relation to men's rights, we have already started engaging on such like issues. And from next year going forward, we are planning on having practical educational campaigns geared at eliminating gender-based violence. I mean, you look at things like debating. We are not debating whether gender-based violence is there in South Africa or at Wits. We are looking at how best do you deal with that. Educational programs will come in handy under such circumstances. There are people who are advocating for punitive measures, that institutions must have serious punitive measures. But no matter how many measures you can put in place to punish students or to punish perpetrators, these things will always be there. Our belief is that we must spend much of our efforts on educating, particularly a male child, that a no is a no, or this language of our women or our girls must come to an end one way or the other. We're also looking into dramatizing the whole experience. For example, generally people do not forget what they see. So if we get drama of some sort wherein these things are acted up between residences, is competition, and we compensate, or we give an award to the best performing residents in carrying out the message. That way we believe that people who have seen something like that will tend not to forget about that. We are also looking into perhaps beefing up our house committees. We appoint a GBV champion in each and every res and incorporate that into the house committee and give them, we train them and give them clear responsibilities and also a leeway, because very often you find that students are afraid to report these type of things. Sometimes it's a question of when you report, who will believe you? So if you have a champion that will take that matter to the rest level, that will become something else. So we're ultimately looking at the fact that the Wits University graduate should be an influencer. Lately, they talk about an influencer. These fellows, their whole career is simply to say, you know what, I've got so much following. When I put something out there, people listen to me. So we want to have a Wits graduate who become an influencer, starting from the university, going out. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor.
Yeah, if I may, Adam, sorry, I want to just make one point. Thanks, Basil. Just for the record, I wasn't targeting men's race. I mean, mustn't appear that I singled out one race as the incoming Vice Chancellor, but they're within my line of sight that are come storming, So I was using that as, it could have been your age or whatever.
Grace, do you want to come in, and then Moshlontlo?
I definitely agree that gender-based violence and our addressing of gender-based violence needs to start at a younger age, specifically, possibly if, the university could have some sort of relationship with the Department of Education or such. But I really think that in terms of long-term commitment towards gender-based violence, we need to engage university students, but also younger children, in analyzing our own constructions of, patriarchal norms and what fuels gender-based violence in South Africa. And then move from there. So especially at a university level, if we can engage actual university students on what the origins and manifestations of gender-based violence is, it could be a productive way in moving forward.
Can I come back, Grace, and can you give me an example on give us an example of what you think we could do in that regard? Are you thinking about a course for first-year students, for instance, or more informal learning?
I think something like this will always have to be gender-based violence in general. Conversations around it tend to be safe when they're informal and tend to be productive when they're informal, because it's already something, I think, in which most people, because of that societal pressure and because of the society that we live in, people don't often want to speak to it or speak up regarding it. So it makes it very difficult to, for example, facilitate a focus group or facilitate a large group discussion on it, because the meaning of it could be lost in people not being willing to share their opinions or comfortable to share their opinions.
Okay, that's useful.
Hello, and thank you so much, Prof. My name is Mshondlo Bushegeleba, and I'm in the ARSC. I think that I would like to appreciate what the director has brought to the table in terms of residence culture and, changing the way in which we operate in residences. As an example, at an all-female res, we make it a point to teach first years about how the university space works and what channels to go through should there be issues around their safety. And I think that we are way past the conversation of saying that we are this is something that needs to be a conversation with different residences. It's a matter of emergency that everyone should be participating within the conversation. So programs that are compulsory within the residence space should be happening, whether be it in all-female, mixed races or male races. And then also, I think that we need to take a look back at what some of the issues that students have faced when they have actually reported, or when they have been in a case, when they have been in a position of being violated or being a victim in a situation, and what has gone wrong. Because we find that we don't go back and evaluate what happened within the organization in which they had approached, or the structure that was supposed to help them, so that it can encourage others whether to come forward, it can encourage others to engage with the conversation and not simply give up because they think that nothing is going to happen within that space. The res life, I think, is a very integral part of the institution itself. So programs such as those, where we go and reevaluate some of the cases that have not been solved, what were the issues in those cases, and what programs can we put in place to make sure that we are attending at GBV in residence life. Thank you so much.
Okay, colleagues, if you've spoken and you don't want to come back in, please take your hands down. Vinoba.
Prof, hi, Vinoba from CCDU, the HIV program. We had those conversations some time ago as well. So how do we get students to engage more, etc., to perhaps put it down almost as a, like a sort of peripheral curriculum program, out of the classroom learning kind of, where we walk students through somewhat of formal training program, and then have practical expectations from them. So perhaps maybe some community engagements, like the students spoke before, maybe some informal kind of contact with other students, etc. And then we sort of graduate them through a particular program at the end of the year. So there's actual, an educative model to it, and then also a very practical component. So something to that effect, yeah?
Okay, Lucy?
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy. I'm the outgoing SRC Gender and Transformation Office. I've made some observation during the term in the office, and I've noticed that most cases that I've been receiving, there are more of student leaders as well, abusing students, misusing their power. So as Mr. Basil was saying, it's very important that student leaders, they get proper training. So if there is an incorrect leadership role that they are portraying to these students, especially first-year students. So I would really recommend that Wits Transformation Office work in collaboration with the rest directors and the dean's office and student governance to make sure that all these leaders, from school council to the SRC, ARC, all these structures, that they are trained proper. I remember I attended a Wits transformation briefing about their policies and all of that. They did mention that they want to raise leaders that are transformational leaders, that are not just abusing students and showing off the power. But I believe that as leaders, we need to demonstrate and show the change so that people and students can actually see that we are bringing change as leaders. We also had, I was collaborating with the CCDU and the GEO. We had gender-based violence discussion, and these initiatives, actually, we got more from students. It's so amazing to engage with students. So I think it's very important to keep that going, to go to residences. I see that Mohloto, she is here as well from ARC. If you guys can keep pushing that side and bring the SRC together, have these normal conversations with students. That's where we come up with ideas. That's where we come up with solutions. Students, they tell you what they prefer, what they think it can work. And we know that this is a national crisis. As Charlene mentioned, it's very important to include other universities as well. Thank you.
Lisa.
Just a question. I know that Lisa is next in line. I just wanted to ask both Mshonto and Lucy just a question. Because they are young women. I mean, you mentioned things about student leaders. So your personal feeling about walking around campus. Say, for example, if you walk from the Pozzoli to Great Hall early evening. I mean, it's a practical question because these things are sometimes perceptions and can be. How safe do you feel walking within campus compared to walking around the Bram area, say within the 300 feet, 100-kilometer radius of the university? The two, just a comparison of the sense of the feeling of safety. Do you feel? I mean, you don't trust your fellow students, or are you safer outside the campus, Lucy and Mshonto?
For me, to be honest, Prof, when I'm inside the university, the feeling is different. I get more afraid when I'm outside. I don't know, maybe Muhlale has a different experience. Yeah. Or it's because I'm not staying at rest. Maybe that's the reason.
Yeah.
Thank you. I need to gauge the feeling, yeah. Ms. Galera and Ms. Taylor as well, I think you're a student as well.
All right, thank you so much, Prof. I think I have to definitely agree with Lucy that it's a complete different feeling when you are actually off campus and that when you are on campus. I think there's more, you become, at least you feel a bit safer when you're actually on campus, but it does not actually completely erase the fact that you are afraid by virtue of you being a female in South Africa within this context, because even in the space that we're in, it is a reflection of the society that you're in. You keep on looking over your shoulder. I hope no one is following me, although it's not the same as just walking alone in Bram. Thank you so much.
Lisa, do you want to come in?
There are a couple of things to be thinking about that I want to put onto people's radar. The first is going back to Harmony's initial point. The Department of Higher Education, towards the end of October and the beginning of November, will be holding 4 sets of consultations with universities across the country, looking at the implementation of their proposed policy frameworks. And I think it would be very important for Wits to be participating in all 4 of those different discussions in order to be able to be part of that national conversation, also to be talking about and sharing its lessons and experiences in terms of what can be learnt around implementing and making policy useful. The second is perhaps to pick up on Vinoba's point, but I did wonder if Wits ever thought about having some kind of online course that was compulsory for every first-year student, that would at least introduce and familiarize them to the works, and may even have a very small little test or some kind of information, but that everybody coming in, or 2 as part of the entry or admission requirements, should be doing that kind of course to at least be familiar with what the policy says, even if there's nothing else that they do. And then I think that as a third point is that we often tend to talk about, and I think Lucy was starting to pick up on it, that violence is a product of particular spaces and the dynamics within those spaces. So she's already started to talk about the difference being on campus and off campus. And I think if we are going to talk about interventions, we start to think about things that are more specific to space, place, and locality. And one of those might be, and I'm just thinking of some of the cases that went to Geo, is to start having quite a strong focus on relationships. We talk about gender-based violence in very unspecific terms. And I think there are differences between rape off campus, rape on campus, within the context of a relationship, or within an abusive relationship. And I think just listening to some conversations that have happened on campus, there is, from my perspective, not enough conversation going on about the dynamics of relationships and how it goes on in relationships and the complexities of abuse within relationships. So I think we don't just need to be focused on masculinity within particular contexts, within particular spaces, and how it's shaped. And as a last thing, research that by Jackie Dugard and Gillian Fintelescu amongst the Wits community, about the experience of lecturers and students. So I think we need to look at this in a fairly multidimensional way.
I didn't hear the last bit, but I did hear, if I can summarize and get an accurate description, I thought what you had said is 4 suggestions. One was the possibility of an online course that makes it mandatory before people proceed with admissions to at least go through the online course that lists and makes them familiar with the rules, regulations, etc. There was a suggestion around we need to think strategies specific to spaces, that the kinds of strategies we adopt internal to a campus and external to the campus may be different, and we need to think that through. You had suggested in particular the issue of perhaps a focus on the dynamics of relationships and how we could manage that and how to undertake some deep reflection in that regard. So, and then you had suggested that DOET is engaging and enabling a full consultation on gender-based harm, and that we must ensure that we're fully part of that conversation. Those are the 4 items that I picked up. Is there anything else that I missed?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me at all? Okay. The last point was The last point was to look at a piece of research that was published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, I think by Gillian Finchelescu and Jackie Dugard, which was a survey of over 1,000 members of the Wits community, both students and staff. And one of the things it highlighted, which I think perhaps doesn't get quite the attention or that needs some attention, was there was a higher degree of reporting by staff of their being harassed by students than students were reporting being harassed by staff. So I think there is also a need to look at some of that, which appears to be a little bit of an unspoken on campus at this point, and I think has been picked up in other universities from some of the conversations I've had there. But there is the question of looking at power dynamics in multiple and quite complex ways and how they are gendered in those very complicated ways.
Lisa, can I just ask a question in relation to that research? I hadn't picked it up. Is that when you say harassed, are you suggesting harassment in sexual manner, or are you looking at harassment in other terms?
I will forward you the study because I think it is something Wits should look at, because it gives some interesting information that doesn't usually come out in the general conversation, but it is in relation to sexual harassment.
Okay, please send it to us. I mean, I think I would love to look at it.
Yeah, sure.
Ways. So colleagues, I don't see any hands up, and I'm going to ask people to put their hands up, but I want to push back a little. I mean, I think that there's some really interesting ideas here that we've spoken about, which is a residence campaign, part of it associated with dramatization. There was the suggestion of a training program for leaders on the campus. And I think we're already working towards that, or have done some of this already. There was an issue that Charlene raised about community practice in the sector as a whole, and Lisa picked it up again in fully participating in the sectoral conversations. There was the suggestion on online courses and perhaps making it mandatory on admissions. There was the issue of honing in on, if you like, relationships and the dynamics of relationships. And clearly there needs to be some focus on that. And then obviously Lisa's last point, that we need to think through the kinds of harassment that may be, that staff feel from students, and to think the kinds of mechanics that need to be adopted. Now, all of that I broadly are supportive of, and I think we can easily develop campaigns and strategies with residents and other things. Here's my pushback. My worry is that we seem to assume that change of behavior is simply the result of educative and acculturation processes. And I think that those are important, do not mistake me. I think enabling people to learn about this and focusing on it is important. Acculturating people is important. Making them know about the rules and regulations and all of that. But I'm also convinced, by the way, that if there are no consequences for malevolent behavior, the educative processes do not lead to the outcomes that we would like. And the question that I am asking, what are the consequences? I mean, I know Jerome and I have this debate often. Unless we have penalties that speak to malevolent behavior, speak to behavior, you're never going to create the incentive culture for people to behave in responsible ways. And here I want to ask a specific question. Is it not, could we, for instance, not take a position that says, if there is ever anybody involved in violent acts against women or violent acts against another, then that's an immediate expulsion, or at least an immediate suspension for 2 years from the university or whatever. Now that comes with problems, of course, because one has to ask, what does violence mean? Is it, how substantive must it be? And you'd ask the second question, should you go to such an action without giving some opportunity to correct the behavior? But I ask the question, I'm not recommending it. I'm asking it as a question. Do you think we should take a harder line? I know when it's extreme cases, of course we will act. But we often try to say we would like you students to learn, and so we give them less than harsh sentences on first acts. Should we take a much harder line on first acts that involve violence against women or other members of the university community? So I'm posing it as a question framed in a broader consequential framework. I see Mehita, Grace, and Larato. Let's start on those. Mehita, we in your hands.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on the suggestion I made in the chat box in response to the question you've just raised, Prof. Habib. I'm aware that the GEO kind of reports annually on, kind of basic information about cases and outcomes, etc. But I think that there is space for the university community to have that information at hand, for it to be communicated in a kind of formal way, perhaps annually or perhaps more than once a year, depending on, that's kind of a minor point. But what I'm trying to get is that I think there needs to be a kind of reporting mechanism within the university community where university management says to everyone else, right, this is what's happened in terms of the formal gender equity processes this year. These are the number of complaints that have received. These are the number of those found guilty. These are the number of staff dismissed, students expelled, etc. So that there is a sense of action, and that the university community can see and hear like what's being done, and that, I'm not suggesting that we're talking about specifics of cases or names. Obviously, to the extent that it's legally required, everyone's confidentiality must be respected. But I think like a kind of a regular reporting on the consequences of where due process has been followed and a university community member, whether staff or student, has been found guilty of a misdemeanor or a violent act or something that would outside be seen as a crime, that there is a consequence. And I think that would go some way to just getting that message across, that it isn't, that people are not getting away with it, if you like. So that's something I think we can seriously consider and maybe build a kind of communications strategy around.
So Mehita, can I come back? I thought we already do that. I thought we already have a rule that says we report. I don't know whether it's enough. We might want to increase it, but I thought we do report every quarter or something like that.
But does it go out to everyone in the university community? I could go to my emails now and tell you how many of our colleagues and how many students have contracted coronavirus in the last month, right? But I wouldn't be able to go through my emails and find a kind of a circular that's come and said, this is where we're at in terms of gender-based violence this quarter or this year, and this is what the university has done, and for everyone in the community to get that. And I think perhaps more transparency, or perhaps a more strategic deployment of that transparency, would help in terms of building that culture of just broader understanding of what some of the consequences are of gender-based violence, and that then in turn may help build that culture of hopefully not doing it.
Okay, just before you come in, Zeblon, Charlene, can you tell us how often we are meant to do this? I've forgotten.
Sure. So the policy currently actually doesn't require that we report, but we have in the amended version put in their specifics outlining how GEO should be reporting on stats, on work done. So we've started doing that this year. We've reported at Senate, And so the idea is to, at the end of the year, put out a report on what has GEO done for this year, what results have come out of cases, campaigns we've worked on, that sort of thing. But I agree with Mahita, it does need to happen more regularly. And so once it's amended, the policy will require that it be a quarterly reporting.
Okay, can I make a suggestion? Because this is a quick win. Can I suggest we do a monthly, like we do a weekly? I think weekly might be a bit too much. Like we do for COVID-19, I think it might make sense. Why can't we do a monthly thing that comes out of Shirona's office, obviously in conjunction with you, that says, here are the cases, here's how many people have been expelled, etc. I think that that's a...
that's doable.
I ask Shirona to sit down and talk to you, Tasneem, if you make a note of that, and we follow that up with a monthly report on gender stats.
Sure.
Okay, can I then get in Grace and then Lerato?
Hi. I think, in terms of reporting at a university level, obviously reporting something like gender-based violence is a deeply personal decision. But from my own experience, I started Wits in 2016. So I was a first year student at Wits Junction when the whole sort of mess of rape at Junction happened. And irrelevant of the sort of background behind that, because there was very limited awareness of the university's actions and what the university was doing, like Mahita's just said, in terms of making students aware of the consequences thereof. For me personally, from my first year, there's sort of been a perceived impunity for perpetrators. Purely because that one thing that happened when I was in first year was never redressed by this very tangible thing that shows what the university is actually doing. And I think in terms of, there's no illusion about underreporting with regard to gender-based violence as it is. And I think that if people that would consider reporting were to see that they're being taken seriously, they're being treated fairly, and something's actually being done, I think this would also go a long way towards addressing underreporting.
Okay, that's useful. Lerato?
Good day. I would just firstly like to say that I definitely agree in terms of that there should be consequences. I would not necessarily state how severe the consequences should be in terms of the punishment, obviously. However, another thing that I feel as though has been rather disregarded is the fact that gender-based violence, in most of the times in men, it's a psychological issue. And I would like to say that in terms of if they had to, let's say, go get suspended, let them also undergo a psychological or therapy session where they unpack all those emotions that men, especially in Black society, where men tend to be told that they should suppress all the emotions, or most probably they grew up in an environment where they were surrounded by domestic violence and they didn't know how to deal with that, and they grew up knowing that that's what they're supposed to do to a female. Therefore, I would strongly suggest that we need to start looking in terms of not just the education process, because you can learn something but not apply it. So it would be a good thing that we start analyzing more psychologically, mentally, what is going on, and allowing men to unpack all of those emotions that they've just suppressed all these years, and now it's led to what it's gotten to now. Another thing that I'd just like to suggest is pepper spray bottles should be freely or frequently distributed to females, especially for those females that stay outside of rest, because unfortunately we are very much unsafe. One can come to you from any side, and it's a pity because you can't run, or you can't, because they can just bombard or attack you unnoticingly. Therefore, I'd say a pepper spray bottle, if that's frequently distributed, might help us to feel that, okay, we can protect ourselves in some way. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If I may, on the first one, I like that idea actually, because, from what you've said, you can actually, Adam, get rid of someone who, for example, I'm using an extreme case here, has committed rape on campus, right? I mean, therefore they get suspended unless or whatever. But this person is disturbed. So therefore, what you've done is you've externalized the problem. That person will go and harm others because they have not really, you've not really gone to the core. But that is obviously has to be done in a measured way because you don't have the resources, depending on the cases. But I think I do like that. You've got like post, ante, and post. Before and after psychological help, because I think that will help. I think that is, but as part of a process of managing consequences, because there has to be, I heard from Grace and Mehita that actually we'll have more reporting if people know that there has been justice that's been done, that actually the university, of course, you don't have the authority. The only institution with the instrument to deliver violence society, to protect society, is a state, right? Through policing, organized violence. We don't have those means of actually doing that, but we'll do the best we can. And even before handing those cases to the police, make sure that we do our bit to cover that. I think that's something that we look forward into doing going forward. Thank you. Paper spray, I'll leave it to the VC. That's a tough one. Yes, the boss.
Before I come to Basil.
Vice Chancellor, I'm a strong believer in consequence management, but the reality out there is that sometimes you punish one, you think you are setting an example or a deterrent of some sort. People's nature, human nature is in such a way that they may never find out, they may never get to know about what I have done. I can get away with it. Everybody keep taking their chances. So over and above punishing, say you say you expel somebody for 2 years or so, but how many are you going to expel? My strong belief is that it's in that we need to, yes, rehabilitate some of these perpetrators, one way or the other. You suspend and ensure that before you come back to vets, you have to undergo this type of a program so that we know that you are rehabilitated. And we also make use of such rehabilitated students as an example. Let them go out there and say, I once was in this particular situation. I once did something like this, and the university suspended me, but at the same time, they gave me a shot in life by enrolling me in for such a program. Then at this point in time, I can boldly stand before everyone and tell that you can beat this whatever, if it's a hormone or like Lerato said, that is some sickness in male. If you can, if I can go to that and come back alive, you can, that will be some sense of somebody looking at somebody who has gone through such an experience and came back alive and tell a story. Because in terms of, you talk about death sentences, so many people were killed, but people still commit the very same crimes that you have seen somebody commit. Thanks very much.
So Basil, I'm not opposed to what you're saying, is I think you need both. That's the only point I'm making. I think that if you simply add acculturation, therapy, and educative without consequences, I think it doesn't work. I think if you only have consequences without educative, acculturation, and therapy, it doesn't work. It's a combination of the two. And which one you apply in which context is really, it's a case by case. You'd have to have the disciplinary and other structures make those choices. That's my point. Sorry, you want to come back, Basil?
No, not really, sir. I follow your thinking. Thanks.
Okay. Is there anybody else that wants to come in? I saw Tasneem's hand earlier on.
Kamini Pillay, sorry, Tasneem. Kamini Pillay made an interesting observation. I think it's related to that. It's quite long, actually. I cannot read it. I don't have my glasses. Kamini, do you want to just summarize, basically, if you don't mind?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Zeblon. I was suggesting that we consider, as part of our collective action as institutions of higher learning, are we considering, or how far are we in this process of considering a national database or a register for all institutions of higher learning? In this way, when we hire staff, we need to check, so we create an obligation to check the database. When we fire staff, HR needs to be sure to upload information onto the database. There are, of course, some legal parameters, confidentiality, determining who will have access to the database. That's something we can regulate, determining what happens, for example, if the offender goes to the CCMA and is found to, who has successfully appealed. Then, of course, also need to consider those kinds of things on removing the person from the database. But I think this is part of our reporting structures, is not just reporting monthly in sort of stats and figures, but actually having a system where we name and shame offenders. And other universities need to take more responsibility when they hire staff.
So the one thing I wanted to raise in relation to that, there has been some conversation that I recall at a USAF level. And Kamini, I thought that the USAF conversation, and I might be wrong in this, was dependent on the government decision in this regard. Government had committed to creating a national database, of which a component would be the universities. But I thought that we were not legally in a position to create the database without effectively having government establish the parameters to enable that. Perhaps somebody else, Lisa, you might be able to give us more ideas in this regard. Wasn't there some national data?
Yes, there are two moves next week are actually the hearings in Parliament around the expansion of the National Register of Sex Offenders. And this will do two things. The first is that it will require any employer who is looking to employ somebody who is going to work with young women under the age of 25, which is a big bulk of the university population, will have to check whoever they seek to employ against that register first. There is also a suggestion, and these are the things, of course, that are going to be debated through the processes, that the entire register, the sex offenders register, will be uploaded onto the Department of Justice's website. So that's where government is heading. Clearly, the weakness of that is that it will depend on a criminal conviction. So that's the one leg of the inquiry. The second is that the Department of Higher Education is at this point soliciting a legal opinion, and I think Carmody might even be working on it, to look at what's the parameters in which one can establish this kind of a register. So there would be two levels at which it works. The one is where there has been a criminal conviction, but then the second would also be, because there are very few university cases are actually reported and go through the criminal courts, is whether you would have that other layer that would be specific to universities. So both are on the cards at the moment.
So, I mean, before I allow Kamini to come in, that's useful. For those who didn't hear what Lisa said, effectively there is parliamentary conversations happening, and part of the act is to look at a national database of those convicted. This will be uploaded in the Department of Justice website, and all employers involving persons less than 25 years of age within their community would be required to check all appointments against that database. The downside with that is you have to be convicted, and there is a second conversation which Kamini and others might be involved in thinking through legally, and that is independent of conviction. Can there be a second register, if you like, that needs to be addressed? The only other point I wanted to add before Kamini comes in, I mean, part of our problem is how little and how inefficient universities are, I'm sorry to say. At this moment, for instance, we already have a whole series of protocols where we are meant to check with each other. And I can tell you now, around corruption, for instance, universities very rarely check. Frankly, in many universities, they don't even check for references. So there's large numbers of people who are getting appointed without reference checks. And that's simply got to do with the inefficiencies of HR departments in universities. And my big fear is you can have the best national register in the world. If you don't have the bureaucracies that are efficient in doing what is meant to be done, it's meaningless. And I worry about how, whether there is, in a world of technology, whether there are more effective ways to keep this in play.
AI can easily do that, Adam.
Sorry, Zeblon, I just want to let Kamini come in and then
No, I'm just saying that artificial intelligence can do it for us. Sorry.
Yes, I knew that Zeblon was going to say that. He was going to say we can get a robot or a machine to do this. Kamini, come in, please.
Thanks, Adam. So yes, Lisa is correct that I am involved in exploring some of the legal challenges that come with having this register, part of which is confidential. But the reason why I wanted to raise it here is to sort of get a sense, or put my feelers out to get a sense of the commitment from Wits as an institution to something like this, because ultimately it's going to rely on cooperation from the university and all universities. And I've also seen this from HR, where they are reluctant to be bold in their background checks, or to be bold in the stance, or be bold in the naming and shaming, So I think that's something that we sort of need to create a culture for this kind of transparency. Having the register will be great, but it will be no more than an ornament if we don't have the support from all institutions.
So my response to that, by the way, at Wits level, we've already discussed this at some level, and so long as it's legal, we'll play. We'll play both at the naming and shaming, provided it's legal, and at the level of participation in the National Register, and we've expressed that at USAF level. So, the question is, if it does pass and it's enabled, then we would be happy to participate. And we've already expressed that to the USAF community. Anybody else? Lisa? I see your hand up.
Sorry, I forgot to put it down. It's down.
Okay.
I'm picking up one comment again. It's very important. It's germane to this conversation here. It's around, even within Wits as well. I've had cases of people that, left, were incompetent in one division and go to the next, or from one faculty to the next. So that thing happens even within the university itself. I think that Charlene made a comment regarding how do we integrate this into HR? It becomes basically a performance measure. Like, when you create a tick box, any, not just broad offense, right? Like fraud or whatever. Now we do. Have you been accused of, is there any record of, GBH, whatever form? Yes or no? If not, like we do with our app for COVID, you've been exposed to a person for the last 14 days and so on and so forth. And that will give us, a better control. And I think if that is integrated as part, of the recruitment process, Tasnim and I will follow up with Khomutso. I'll ask Tasnim to talk to Khomutso, and I know they can actually enact that. That's just basically an executive decision. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and we could do that. Anne, you want to come in?
Thanks, Prof. I just want to make 2 points. The one is to do with the point around mental health aspect of gender-based violence and the issues surrounding that. I just want to say, with regards, and this has come over the years, where sometimes there's been a consequence for the perpetrator where part of the so-called punishment is that the person has to attend therapy or counseling. We've got to make sure that therapy and counseling is perceived as a rehabilitation and as a positive, receptive process, not as part of a punishment. So that what I wanted to emphasize really is I think that this should be therapy could be seen as part of an intensive program of rehabilitation, a psychosocial program. So it's not perceived as a punishment, and that it's something much more holistic. The second thing is just a point on collaborations with other institutions. I'm also thinking about basic education, because the issues also emanate often, as we know, from high school and even earlier. And I'm just wondering if there is just some thought to possibly collaborating there on quite intensive programs on gender-based violence with high schools, so that it's something there could be mandatory. Thank you.
And just on that, USAF has indicated that the Department of Higher Education and Training have been talking to the Department of Basic Education around joint programs across sectoral boundaries.
That's great.
Tasneem, you want to come in?
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. So my comment relates to your question around accountability. And I just want to make a comment about our processes. So our processes are, as you know, victim-centered, but they still uphold the rules of natural justice. So they're really way more sophisticated than the processes in the criminal justice system at the CCMA, etc. And I raise this point because when complainants have to take this outside to the criminal justice system, or there's an appeal at the CCMA, because those processes are quite rigid, we sometimes end up undoing all of the good we've done within the university context. And because those processes are quite cumbersome. And perhaps Lisa and even Carmony can advise if there's any sort of move by advocates or the likes of CALS or elsewhere to kind of change the thinking and the processes around dealing with GBH in the criminal justice system, in the broader legal system, so that this is not cumbersome and that it doesn't act as a deterrent for complainants to take things forward outside. I mean, you know, our processes are actually a model process that can be used possibly outside in the broader legal system to help make these processes less legalistic.
So, colleagues, that's an interesting point, Tasneem, in the sense that we've already got cases where we've taken action against individuals and they are in the broader system trying to reverse that. And I think in one or two cases they have succeeded. In many cases they have failed, and a couple of ones are underway already. And it is an interesting challenge, because actually when they get returned by the broader system, victims and even other activists, but in a sense we're caught in a bind because we've been overturned, or our processes have been overturned or superseded by broader systemic interventions. So it's something that we just got to be cognizant of. And perhaps, I don't know, Carmony or Lisa, if you want to come back in this and give some advice, if there is any, or whether we just have to manage this as we proceed. Anybody? So
I'll come.
Yeah.
I can come in, Adam, quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a great disappointment of this current trumpeting of change to the laws around gender-based violence is that I think there's been far too much emphasis placed on registers and nothing at all placed on process. You know, and I think if the process was better, you'd be more likely to get to conviction, which would make a register more useful. So no, there has been no real attempt to look at things like the shifts towards inquisitorial processes or having an ancillary prosecutor. There are attempts to introduce intermediaries beyond just children under the age of 16. There are attempts to do some CCTV testimony, but it doesn't go far. It doesn't go as far as it could, to be honest.
Okay. Kamini, do you want
some questions, Adam, in terms of...
Sorry, Kamini, Lisa.
I was just going to say, I think that there's another side to what Wits could be doing, and that's in terms of its research and thinking around how the university intervenes beyond just its own internal processes. But it is to be starting to think about how do we push forward and think in ways that are more creative, and whether we do that through PhD, postdoc students, CALS, whatever. But how could the university be playing that broader role beyond just an internal role?
Okay. That's useful. Kamini, do you want to come in before I go to Laurel?
Nothing to add at this stage. Thanks, Adam.
Laurel?
Thanks, Adam, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not going to repeat the ideas that people had, but if it's a brainstorming, I think we need to get marketing on this. Adam, when you opened it, you said we have this institution, we have these mechanisms, we have these policies. And I think that there needs to be much broader awareness. And so I think in the same way that Wits gives you the edge, there was a while where the zero tolerance, a bit that it hackneyed, and I think that, you know, and someone made this point earlier, that institutions of higher education, although they mirror real life, there are also spaces where time and mediocrity and so-called abnormal normality can be suspended. And so, you know, in the effort, we spoke about learning and behavioral change, I think that we set our own rules within our own institution. I think there needs to be a huge market strategy or multiple strategies. What constitutes a real man? And where can people go for help? You know, I'm thinking of this woman who was killed wherever she was not on Wits campus, and more as academic life and student life moves online into virtual spaces. Where is the SOS? Where is the lifeline? You know, that institutionally, day or night, there's a 24-hour hotline that someone can call and know that they are connected, and we as an institution care about them. One of the earlier comments, and I've written in the spaces, and I'm speaking only because it seems that that's what's forming the conversation, is the oral stuff and not the verbal. There are novels. There are many novels that have been written, both South African and internationally, about the effects of gender-based harm and the intimate partner violence. And I think to drill down to some of these issues that we've raised, not to medicalize them or psychologize them, but I think fiction or even biography, autobiography, have very powerful ways, especially for young people. So if we adopted a novel every semester that everyone read, and then we opened up conversations across, you know, cafe conversations in multiple spaces, we've learned how to do that now, not only physically, but virtually. And you know, there can be all men's spaces, there can be all women's spaces, there can be Black spaces, there can be graduate student spaces, there can be mixed spaces, whatever it is. And I think that, you know, that's a very powerful way of building community and solidly standing behind, you know, making a point of what we stand for. You can get media coverage around this, sloganize it, and I think it just has to be on the tip of everybody's tongue. I mean, we're having, and I appreciate private conversation, I appreciate closed group, but, you know, in order for this to really gain traction, because the other, for what is normal, and we're saying it's not normal, and it disturbs us and it bothers us and gives us sleepless nights. You know, we've got to create a huge campaign around this. So I think that there's room for that, and let me sign off at that point.
There are some immediate things that we will do. So the monthly reports, I'll make sure we kick off, and I'll get a conversation happening between Sharona and Charlene and appropriate people to make sure that that kicks off. I will make sure that the training program, at least I thought we do have this, but the training program for orientation in the new year captures the training program for leaders, but that we have a more extensive program, and will enable Charlene's conversation with USAF. And then we will take in residence campaign, online courses, all of the other things, national register, a think through of the research. I'm going to take all of that first to set, but then from set to be integrated into the agenda, the plan, the program agenda of executive management, so that we can start tracking these. So let me give Vinoba the final word, and then I'll bring this to an end. Vinoba.
Apologies, Prof. Just a quick thought as you were sort of summing up all those points. I think it would also be a useful exercise just to see what is being done across the campuses, and at different schools as well in terms of GBV support. So beyond just the Gender Equity Office, but I think what exactly is being done within some of the curriculum and also, some within the units, obviously like CCDU, etc. Thank you.
Okay. That makes sense, and we'd be happy to follow up on that. Any final remarks? Colleagues, thank you very much. I'm really appreciative of the fact that you took out an hour and a half in a very busy part of the year. The conversation has been very, very useful, far more practically oriented, and gives us some wonderful opportunities to take forward. So thank you very, very much. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.